Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H event space. You're tuned into new horizons in color accuracy. BenQ's calibration software, of course, hosted by BenQ and the man himself. We haven't had him on in a while. Art is right. Art Swansong. Art, how's it going?
Doing well, Derek. How about you?
Doing wonderful. I'm going to throw it out to our viewers. Look, you're going to be discussing something that's so important, yet so hard to show virtually because everyone is watching you from a different screen. So today's going to be Art's reminder of it might be time to calibrate. It might be time to look at monitor selection. Holidays are coming up. We all love treating ourselves. So, Art, I'm going to throw that nugget out there and let you do your thing. And I will remind everybody, if you do have any questions at all, drop them into the YouTube chat. Art, I'll see you in a bit for some Q&A.
All right, sounds great. Perfect. Thanks so much, Derek. And welcome, everyone. Thank you for being here. I'm Art Swansang. I'm BenQ Global Ambassador, and we're here to talk about calibration today. So what I'm going to do is give you a run through of the different method and the new updated software that BenQ has shared with us in terms of calibration that will make our life easier as creative for us to get good and accurate colors when we're having multiple displays or when we really want to have our design space, the display that we have match, for instance, an Apple laptop, a MacBook Pro, or something like that. There's so many different ways to do that, but I'm going to cover these new software solution from BenQ. But before we do any of those, what I'd like to do is share with you a little bit of my setup, what I have. So right behind me, I have two BenQ PD 3225Us. These are 32-inch 4K. They are the part of BenQ Designer Series, PD Pro Designer Series. So these are the IPS black panel that has a contrast ratio of 2000:1. They're really amazing, has over 90+% P3 color gamut. Always love editing on these. Now, it really just depends on the creative workflow you're in. For a majority of creators out there, I think these are going to be great displays that will match in with your workflow. However, if you do photography and you do print, I would encourage you to look at BenQ SW display instead because it has hardware calibration and 99% Adobe RGB coverage. So slightly different workflow there regarding those two. Now with those display out of the way, what I also have on this one is a Mac Mini M4. So this is the M4 Pro, and we're going to use that to do a demo, keyboard, mouse. And the way how I have this link up is pretty much using just display daisy chain. So I have the display link, one of them, this one is linked to my Mac Mini, where this one is actually daisy chain off of this one. So it's just one cable going to my Mac Mini. And lastly, most importantly, we're going to talk about two different solutions in terms of color management today. We're going to talk about BenQ Display Color Talk, which is a solution for you to match either two BenQ PD displays or to match a BenQ PD displays to an Apple MacBook Pro. The demo I'll be doing today will be matching these two displays, but with this BenQ Display Color Talk, you do not need to use a calibrator. So this is great for anyone just getting into color management. You just want to get used to the workflow. You just want to understand how you can match your display better. This would be the way to go. Now, if you want the best precision possible, I'm going to recommend that you get a calibrator and use BenQ Palette Master Ultimate, which is now compatible with BenQ PD displays, not just only SW anymore. They have brought that over to BenQ PD line displays too, which is really great. And that helps eliminate a lot of the confusion in terms of calibration. They made the process very simple. So what we're going to do is first talk about display color talk and do some of the corrections to explain to you the process a little bit so you can see that. Then what we're going to do is jump right into Palette Master Ultimate, run a calibration on this one. And what we can do with Palette Master Ultimate that is really awesome is now you can do what they call a display match display clone. So essentially what I can do is calibrate this display, this secondary PD display, but not calibrating it to itself, which is normally what we recommend out there, but rather calibrating it to this specific display color output. I think that's going to be great. We're going to be demoing all of those in this live that we're doing right now. So the one last thing I do want to talk about regarding the equipment that I have is the calibrator. The one that I'm using for this demo is the Calibrate Display Plus HL. Now, if you're just a photographer, I would probably say the Calibrate Display Pro HL is going to be the best device that you want to get. And the Display Plus and Display Pro HL, those two devices are compatible with BenQ Palette Master Ultimate. So these are the one that looks like that. They're a little bit darker on the side. I'm going to bring this up a little bit. Let's bring it closer to the camera. There we go. So it looks kind of like this. That's the one you want to look for. Those are the ones that I recommend. I would not get the Calibrate Display 123 because it's not compatible with the software and there's a lot of limitation on that. So if you're aspiring, if you're a pro already, I would look at the Display Pro HL or Display Plus HL. All right. With that said, what I have launched right now, this is BenQ Display Color Talk. And let me switch the camera a little bit there so that we can see the screen a little bit closer. All right, perfect. So this is BenQ new solution called Display Color Talk. And what Display Color Talk enables you to do are a few things. So the number one thing that you can do is you can do a matching between two BenQ displays as you see right now. Let me just do one more thing here so that we can see things a little bit easier. Bear with me just a second. There you go. Cool. Okay. So with BenQ Display Color Talk, we have two different solutions right there. And I think this is off the camera a little bit. I know, right? Technical difficulties and always happen with things like these. There we go. So you have the option to do a BenQ to BenQ display, which is what we're going to do now. Or if you have a MacBook, you can also do a MacBook to a BenQ display as well. Display Color Talk is a solution that you can go in and run kind of like a calibration of sort. Although you're really relying on human vision when it comes to something like this. So there are going to be certain limitations, but it's a great way to match two displays together, whether it is a BenQ PD to another PD or a MacBook Pro to a BenQ display. So what I'm going to do is click on BenQ to BenQ and I am going to click on Start. Now, when it comes to this, there's going to be what they call a binding process. This is pretty much deciding which display you want to be the primary and which displays you want it to be the secondary. What I'm going to do is have this display right here. This is the one on the left side of me. This is going to be the primary, where the other one, this secondary PD 3225U, that is going to be the secondary display. So what I'm going to do right now is click on Start Binding, and we can see that we have the benchmark display. So this is our main one. I'm going to make this our benchmark display right there. And the fine-tune display, I'm going to drag this across, and that's going to be the one we're fine-tuning. Benchmark is the one that we're using as the reference display, which is the one I have here. Fine-tuning is the one that we're going to make changes to it. So what I'm going to simply do is click on Bind. So that's one of them, and I'm going to click on Bind on the other one. So what it's really doing right now, the program is going to take just a quick moment, and it says complete the binding process right here. I'll click on Next. And if we can see right now, it's going to take just a moment because the program is really going in to the display firmware and looking at the color settings. So right now you can see right there, I have PD3220U. This is the benchmark display. This is pretty much this. This is the color mode. And then there's the user color mode on the other display. You can kind of see there that is showing the check mark that the color modes and the way how they're set up is matching. This is what the program's doing. It's actually communicating with both of the display firmware, which is really great. So when it comes to this process, we are going to do color adjustment. But these color adjustments are going to be rather interesting. Now, what I'm also going to do is, let me do one more thing here. I'm going to adjust the exposure a little bit. I'm going to slightly darken so we can see the tones better. Now, with this, we're relying on human vision to do the color matching between these two displays. And I'm doing this through camera, so the colors are going to be slightly off between the two. That's because of the chromaticity and the way how the spectral colors are being read by the camera sensor, all the additional stuff, but I'll walk you through this. So, as a creative, as a designer, if you're going to use this software to really do color matching, what you need to decide is what's the priority for you. Do you do a lot of design that involves a lot of skin tone? If that is the case, then you would refer to the picture as the primary color matching, meaning that you're going to look at the picture and like, okay, I'm going to look at the skin tone as the primary and I want to match those. However, if you are working mostly with graphic and design, the other best thing that you might be able to do is looking at these color patches on the bottom. But as you go through the process, the best thing you can do is, if you start by matching the picture, match the skin tone, match the color, right? If you start by matching the color patches and try to consistently match the other color patches that shows up. Don't try to switch them around because they can get confusing really quickly. And also, it can cause color inconsistency. So that would be the recommendation I have. Now, the other thing too is I'm standing from the side right now, but if you're really doing this, I would probably stand just right between those two displays right there. This way you can see the colors from a pretty good perspective that's even on both sides. All right. So with this, the first thing we're going to do is adjust the color temperature. And what we're really simply doing here with display color talk is very similar to using color correction in Lightroom or in Photoshop for that matter. And the recommendation that we have in terms of matching these is for you to start with color temperature first. Yes, even though brightness is set up there, but when you start to adjust the color temperature, you're going to adjust inadvertently the brightness of the display too. And it's just best for you to start with color temperature. This way, you can get a chance to fine tune the way how the red, greens, and blues are looking, and then afterwards go and just fine tune the brightness before we go to the next stage. So what I'm simply going to do now, I can see that this is more yellow in a way, so I'm going to add a little bit more yellow, more cyan. So we're going to add a little bit more red to this. I think it's getting a little closer now. And I'm also going to add a little bit more blue, probably like about 2. Let's add a little bit more magenta to that one by subtracting green. And between these two displays, we're going to bring that back by 1. Let's bring that back to neutral, and then let's go to a little bit more blue. So between those two, I think it looks pretty close right now. And what I'm really looking at predominantly is the person's skin tone. So I'm going to go and compare this by looking at the pictures and not so much the color patches, because a lot of what I do involves people or their videos of myself. So there's a lot of skin tone there. As far as the brightness between these two go, I would probably darken that display down by just a little bit there. And now I think that's actually pretty close to each other. So I'm going to click on next. Now, once we do this, we're going to start to adjust all these 6 colors. And by the way, you can drag these sliders around like so. Now that color looks really bad, and you can obviously see that. We can fine tune it 1 point at a time, or if we really mess up, there's that little circular arrow there that we can just click and it will just reset back to default. So let's try to match these two a little bit. I think that this display right now, the one we're looking at, is a little bit more orange. So what we're going to do is change the hue, and let's bring it a little bit more towards like the pink magenta side. So I'm going to do some subtraction on there. And for the most part, I think that looks fairly close to each other now. When we're evaluating the skin tone and everything, that looks really close. So I really like that. Let's play with the saturation a little bit, see if we can change a few things, but I don't think there's really much by ways of doing that. Then we're going to go to the next color. Now you can start to see that if you're not in a fully color control environment, if there are lights coming into your display, this can really change your perception quickly. So as great as this solution is, I think this is a great starter solution, but we're going to talk about how you can actually use a calibrator to run the calibration too, and a lot of advantage that comes from that. So when we take a look at this, the colors, I would probably say that we can probably bring the saturation down by about 1 or 2. And let's bring the hue a little bit less green, so we're going to subtract that a little bit there. Now, the one thing that I'm noticing as I'm going through this right now is that the secondary display that I'm adjusting is a little darker, but at the end, there is a way for me to really just change the brightness one more time too. So I'm going to leave it as such right now. I think the color are looking fairly close to each other. In fact, what I'm going to do is, nope, wrong side. Let's bring this towards more towards the green. All right, I think that looks pretty good. So, or close enough anyway, as far as we can get it. I'm going to go to next color. So this one, the green is actually looking pretty much right on. The only thing I might change is add a little bit of saturation on the green and maybe change the hue a little bit towards slightly more blue. But that is a really close match as far as just looking at the pictures, by the way. I'm not using the color patches, which is one. I'm using the pictures to do my matching for these particular tasks. Now, when I take a look at this blue, color is pretty much like, I would say these are really close to each other. What I would probably do is bring the saturation up a little bit and make this a little bit more blue instead of green. All right, that looks good. Let's go to next color. We're going to take a look at the blues. And for the most part, these are also fairly close. I'm gonna leave this one as is, maybe. Let's see. I'm gonna do a little bit addition. Let's bring that in. And another thing too, by the way, as much as I'm only going by points at a time, having the background in color management, having been doing this for a long time, enable you to see a lot more of these. But if you haven't do that or done this like, as long as I have, one thing you can always do is just start to drag this and you can start to see the color changes. Like obviously, right? That's really going too far. So don't, be afraid to just play with this and learn the process and color match this way too. Just because I'm doing one point at a time, you can always go a little bit more drastic and bring it back. This way you have a better reference. I'm gonna go to the next color. I'm gonna leave the blue the way how it is. For this one, we're gonna bring up the saturation a little bit, probably by, just maybe like 1 point. Yeah, we'll do it to 51. And then I think color-wise, it has a little bit more blue. So let's bring a little bit more red in on that one. Okay. Looks fairly close. I will click on next. So now what you have at the end here, this is a comparison of before and after. So you can do a before. This is what it looks like. This is after. And for the most part, if your displays are the same two PD models and they're pretty much purchased or close to about the same time, when you do these color adjustment, there's going to be some changes, but it won't be drastic. It won't be one of those things where it's like, whoa, what the heck happened there? That's not going to be the case. Now, with all of these, what you can simply do is come and click on each of these individual colors. However, when it comes to this process at the end, do note that there's no more reset button. The reason why this is happening is because this is more of the fine tune on top of the fine tuning process for you to do the color matching. You can also change the brightness, and I mentioned that we want to go in and bump the brightness on the display up a little bit, so I'm going to do that right now. I think that's a better brightness match between those two, so we're going to close that out. But so far, looking at each color and the way how they're matching, this is pretty good, just based on human vision. So from this, I'm going to click on complete, and once that's done, what the software Display Color Talk will do is make all those adjustments that we have changed and pretty much write it into the display user color mode on that one. So that is BenQ Display Color Talk pretty much in a nutshell, showing you how you can really get started with color management, color calibration without having to own a calibrated device. Now, like I said, I don't really recommend that. I think that our human vision is fundamentally flawed, as great as it may be. We do a lot of auto stuff, but a lot of things can change our perception. For example, the colors on my wall right now, the purple light I'm throwing in, is probably changing my perception, including the purple shirt I'm wearing. But hey, I love purple. What can I say, right? But for instance, another thing that can happen too is that if you're just enjoying your editing and having chocolate, that changes your color vision. If you're having a glass of wine while you're editing, that changes your color vision. So these are the reason why we want to just be a little bit more precise, or a lot more precise, by using an instrument. And speaking of instrument, what I'm going to do is quickly change between this camera and another one. And what we're going to do is, instead of using Display Color Talk, we're going to talk about a more precise way to do calibration. And this is, in general, the way how I would recommend that we would go about it. So for this, we'll be using BenQ Palette Master Ultimate. Now, in general, in the past, Palette Master Ultimate has been a software that's really created fundamentally from the ground up, is designed in-house at BenQ Lab. And amazingly enough, like if you know the background is, you will know how astonishing it is, because it's led by my really great friend, Dr. Chris Bai, and he only has a team of around 6 people working for him. So they built this whole solution from the ground up. Started with the SW hardware calibrated display to get really great precision colors out of that. And for those of you that have an SW display and you use Palette Master Ultimate before, you will know that that's a really great software. But what they have done is they have now brought that software and bring compatibilities to the BenQ PD series. So these are going to have support for the newer PD series in the lineup. And I think this is really great because it eliminates a lot of things that happens with software calibration. One of them being that if you've done the software calibration before, the software will always ask you what display you are using, or specifically what backlight is your display. Trying to figure out what backlight your display has, it's literally like throwing a dart at a moving target that is actually moving really fast, because it's really hard to pinpoint down what they're using. There are so many display backlight technology. Yes, there are LED backlight type technologies, but each of those LEDs and the coding they use on the panel itself, whether that is PFS phosphor, RGB LED, and all these other things, changes the way how the color output is from the display. This is what we call the spectral output, or the really official term is called the EDR, emissive display reference. So there's a lot of data in there that we have to cipher through. And if we ever call these display manufacturers and ask them, hey, by the way, what backlight technology are you using? They're not going to tell you, because most of the time the first tier support are not going to have this answer. And secondly, they're not really going to tell you because there are just too many of them out there in the market. Palette Master Ultimate just sidestepped that altogether, so you can get precise colors because BenQ has already matched this output color to the best way to fine tune and calibrate it. So let's start by calibrating this PD 3225U first, and then what we're also going to do is a matching, but I'm going to talk about the cool matching part about Palette Master Ultimate. All right. So I'm going to switch cameras so that we can see that a little bit closer and get a chance to see the interface as far as how this is working. So let's jump in right there. Okay. So Palette Master Ultimate. First, I'm going to pick the monitor that I want to use. This is my PD3225U number 1, and the calibrator, it's going to be the Display Plus HL. We'll give this a moment, and if it doesn't, you can always click on that circle arrow to refresh to, but it recognizes this, we're going to start. Now, when you come to this screen, the second one, you simply have the option to choose between color calibration and validation. In general, my advice is just to do the calibration because it does the validation in session as well. To just do the validation alone is one of those things where it's like, you can know where your display is, but if it's off, you're going to have to calibrate it anyway. So my advice is just to go in and just do the calibration. So we are going to enter that. And when it comes to this screen, this is what I mean by BenQ has simplified this process down by quite a bit, because you just really have to take a look at your workflow and what you do in terms of just choosing what you want to calibrate and how you want to calibrate that. So there are the different ones out there. What I'm simply going to do for this one is I am going to choose Graphic Design sRGB, because this is still, in general, the most compatible color gamut, despite the fact that majority of displays that we have in the market that can now show P3, there are more than, I would probably say, a majority of the other displays out there are probably not capable, even though us as creative, we're using all these color capable display. And when we do this, we need to really think about, I would say that this way, the lowest common denominator out there. And sadly, at this point of time, industry has not fully standardized and gather around or coalesce around Display P3 yet. That's coming, but it hasn't fully been standardized. So we're going to stick with Graphic Design sRGB. And when it comes to this, you can go in and change certain settings on it too. The parameters for changing these, most of the time, you're going to be fairly limited on these. But what you can do is go in and set the brightness of the display. Now, if you're doing graphic design, and especially if you're doing anything for print, my magic number for you guys out there would be anywhere between 80 to 120 candela. That is the CD per m square or meter square, or the other terms that we use for this colloquially is the word nit. So you might hear a lot of the word nits. This is pretty much nit in graphic design, or in display calibration. Nits, candela, they are interchangeable terms. So the number between 80 to 120 is going to be good. It will depend on your environment. And if you're not printing, if you want to calibrate your display brighter, is that okay? Sure. I mean, there's really no downside to that. Just note, though, that if you're doing any type of work creatively and you want to print it out, it will probably come out really dark in print. So that's kind of one of the downsides. So what I'm simply going to do is set this to 100 candela or 100 nits. We're going to stick with CIED 65. That's going to be the color temperature of the screen. We're going to use color gamut sRGB, and also for the gamma, we're going to use sRGB. Now, these two, that doesn't tell you whether it's gamut or gamma. So the first one is going to be gamut. The second one is going to be gamma that you're going to use. So I'm going to click on next to start the calibration process. And it says that we always want to leave our display on for at least 30 to 60 minutes. My magic rule of thumb is around 15 to 20 gets the display to warm up enough. And it doesn't really matter whether you have a brand new display or this display is older. Now, they also recommend that you use either DisplayPort or USB-C. Here's the thing. If you use HDMI, can you run a calibration with? Yes, that's not a problem. However, I would just run a calibration and check whether it passes the validation or not. If it doesn't, you might want to look at using a different source. The reason why is because HDMI is a standard designed mostly for TVs. And because there's only like a finite amount of bandwidth on a cable, a lot of times what the manufacturer of these devices would do is truncate the signal. So rather than outputting 0 to 255, they would just output 16 to 235, dropping the pure whites and also the pure blacks so that the tones don't scale really well anymore when it comes to these type of display for pro creative workflow. Most of the computers will not have the problem nowadays with those issues, but if you do run into that, that's the reason why. There are settings and power settings to turn off on the display, so do make sure you go in and change it so that your screensaver doesn't turn on after 2 minutes and your display doesn't turn off after 2 minutes for power saving functions. And if you're on a laptop, obviously preventing it from going to sleep and so forth are going to be important. Now, the other thing that I want to quickly go over as well is if you are on a Macintosh system, and this is also applied to PC too, I would go into System Settings and Display. And let me minimize that down quickly. So a few things that you want to do for this one, I am running on a Mac Mini, so we're not going to see that option for automatic adjust brightness or true tone. But if you do have those enabled on your laptop, you want to go in and disable those as well, because the brightness will only work on your laptop screen. However, when it comes to true tone, it will affect not only the built-in laptop displays, but it will also affect any external displays you link up to the system. So I want to point that out as in System Settings Display. It's pretty much right here. On this one, I'm running on a desktop, so we're not going to see that. But I just want to be inform you of that. All right. So what we're going to do, and the other thing too, it says do not use mirroring. So right now you can see that these two displays are running independently of each other, and you have to do that because mirroring is definitely not going to work for any color management or any color calibration for that matter. I'm going to click on next, and what it wants me to do is grab this calibrator right here. And if you have one of these, a couple things that I do want to share with you is that there is that little counterweight there. And on the back side of it, you can see that there's like a slight bar you can just push and change the length of the cable. The other thing is this is pretty much the device. What you can simply do is pull out the cap just like so, and then rotate, right, to expose the lens in the front. Now, a few things that I do want to note about this, you will note that there is a felt lining there. So I'm kind of rotating this around so you can see a little bit better. This felt lining is going to prevent a lot of stray light from coming in, so you're going to be good. Now, what I'm going to do is put this on the display as such. And another thing I'm going to do is angle this up. Now, you can certainly do a calibration in a bright environment like this. It's not going to be an issue. I'm going to click on next, and it's also telling us to tilt the display back. We're going to click on next, have this line up in the middle of the display, and we are going to click on start. This is going to start the calibration process, and it's going to go through a few number of patches. Now, the one thing that I want to address right away when you run this program is that you may be wondering, this is only calibrating 23 patches, and you're probably thinking, oh, well, wait a second. If I use, for example, other software solution, they're calibrating hundreds of patches. How can this be better? The reality of this whole thing is that it's not so much the amount of patches, it's so much of how much that baseline data is already there in these software to run the calibration. When you're using a software solution from Calibrite or any other brand for that matter, they have to design their software so that it can accommodate a wide variety of displays that are out there in the market without knowing the type of spectral output, without knowing the color gamut of the display. Having those extra data points that you're really measuring or just defining those points inside an ICC profile, it doesn't really do much in terms of fully adjusting the colors of the display. So the reason why BenQ is only doing 23, part of it is because it's done on a baseline. They already know how these displays are going to look. They already put in this EDR, the spectral output, the emissive display reference value. So they already know how these are going to respond. And what you're really doing is adjustment on top of these to just change, the colors so that it fits within the gamut a lot better, or more like fine-tuned per se, just based on your computer output. Because a few factors in our computers are changing the way how the colors are coming out from our display. One of them would be the computer itself, would be the hardware. It would be the OS that can change the output. And lastly, the drivers that are running our graphic output can also change the color output. And lastly, the nice thing about Palette Master Ultimate is that is doing the validation pretty much in session. So we're going to get a report at the end, and we're going to see what our delta E is going to be on this one. Now, for those of you that are unfamiliar with delta E, in general, a delta E value, anything less than 3 is considered good. For a pro display, even though you may be able to see some color variations a little bit, anything less than 2 is considered excellent. So usually we want a delta E value to be below 2 for a pro workflow, because it's really hard to discern the colors unless you have them side by side to each other for you to see the variation. We're almost done with this validation, and then afterwards what we're going to do is match that second BenQ to this specific display output. We're not going to calibrate that one individually, and this is really cool. So it says calibration complete, check report. Now what I'm going to do is bring the device down, and I'm also going to rotate this lens right here. You can see I'm rotating the cover to just cover this up, and I'm going to push this back down. All right, so for this, we're actually getting a pretty good calibration result. And because I'm setting my display to 100 nits, it is a little bit darker than it was before. But this is also one of those things that you can't really go in and define, like the brightness of the display. So if you try to change the percentage of a display brightness, it doesn't tell you how many nits you're at. It just tells you in terms of percent. And that's one of the more inaccurate ways of doing it. I personally love this a lot more because it tells you the result that you're going to be at. So this is all the target value that we have, and this is the value that I was able to achieve. So the brightness is pretty much within 1 nit. I'm going to also say this. If your brightness is off by, like, I would say 3 to like 5 nits, maybe like 7, it's really hard to tell that apart. The magic number for nit brightness that we can start to tell as human being is generally, around 10. So if this is off by 10 or so, you can probably see that at that point. Now, in terms of white point, this is really almost close to right on. I would say the white point, you have a range of around plus minus 300 Kelvin. It can be off by like more or less. You're going to be okay. But this is pretty much almost right on. You're never going to get exactly like 65. And with this being less than like 20 points off, we are pretty much good to go on this one. All right. So color gamut, these are all the values. And the black point is 0.1 nits, which is actually really good. The average delta E for this one is 0.0. This is below 1, so it means color accuracy on this display that we're able to get right now is really good. Now you can also, I'm going to go back here, and you can also click on right there under more detail. When you do click on more detail, and what I'm going to do is actually, let me change this a little bit. This way we can see our screen a little bit better. Hopefully that helps. We can actually click on the more detail, as I mentioned, and we can see a whole bunch of results and also the delta E for each one of these. And you can see that the delta E for all these other colors, including all the red, the greens, and the blues, are below 1. So the software solution that BenQ have come up with this to calibrate is giving you a really great delta E value at the same time. I'm going to complete this display out. And once I do that, it's going to tell me as follows. So it says calibration is complete. Please do not adjust the OSD. That's the on-screen display menu color setting manually, because if you do it, it's going to change the calibration. So I'm going to confirm this, but the whole reason behind this is because this is not a hardware calibration. It doesn't write this into a hardware calibration slot. What it does is it writes all these calibration data, and you're going to probably see this. So let's see. It's going to write all these calibration data into the color mode called users on the display, as you see right now. So it's not necessarily writing into a LET per se, it's just writing into the user slot, which is specifically designed to store these calibration data. But again, I can still go in and change the brightness on the display. It's something that I don't recommend doing. Now, let's do display matching, because I think this is going to be cool. So what I'm going to do is click on the display name. We're going to go to the secondary one right there, which you can already see. It jumps to the secondary display. The device is the same, Calibrate Display plus HL. I will click on Start, and we'll do the calibration again. Now, for this screen, when we're on the secondary display, what we're going to do is scroll all the way to the bottom, and there's an option called Measure and Match right there, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to click on, it says press to measure or click to measure. It should be really click to measure. So what I'm going to do is click on that, and a warning came up. So it is recommended to measure BenQ display of the same model. BenQ is unable to guarantee color consistency when using different monitors. Preview function will be temporarily disabled during the measurement stage. So if you can't do the before and after, and I recommend that you really do this from like a PD to a PD. At worst case, I would probably say an SW to a PD, but I would probably not push it any much further than that. And ideally, it's going to be a PD to a PD because the color gamuts are going to be pretty much very similar to each other. So for that, I'm going to click on continue. And what it wants me to do is it pops up with this window and it says drag measurement window. So drag this window to the monitor that you want to measure. So I'm simply going to bring it over here. And now we're seeing both screens. And I'm simply going to click on next. It's going to tell me to bring the calibrate out again. So I'm going to bring this out, pull the cover just slightly. You can see it clicks off. Rotate this so that it exposes the lens again. I'm going to click on next and it's going to tell me to tilt the display back. Now, realistically, this interface allows you to pretty much measure any portion of the screen. I can measure that top corner if I want to by just clicking the interface there. It's probably not the best idea to do that. So if I do that, it's probably not the best one because you're not really measuring from the center. So for the best result, I recommend dragging this into the center of the display. And even though it's off camera a little bit, we're going to do it this way. And I'm going to click on next, align this up. With that, tilt the display back. Make sure that you do tilt the display back. Otherwise, your device may not sit fully flat on the display and that can change the result. I'm going to click on start and it's going to do the measurement. So what it's doing right now is measuring all these known values that it's going to do the adjustment for. And it's going to give me a report of how this display is outputting color. So we're going to give this a moment. All right, with that finished, I am going to angle this display back and bring the calibrator down, put the cover on it for just the time being so that the dust and everything doesn't go into it. And with this, I'm measuring the luminance similar to what it was before. Let's bring this over a little bit so we can see, and we're going to zoom in. So luminance is 99 candela. Gamma normally is 2.2. 2.16 is really close in terms of tracking. The white point and the gamma, these are the RGB coordinates for the RGB XY coordinate for each of these. A lot of math stuff, let's not worry about it. So what you want to do with this one, you can save this as a target. So if you want to have this as a target that you can use later on, you can certainly do that. And if you don't save it as a target, I just cancel it out. You can simply press on done. And now what the software has already known is the color output of this display. So you don't have to save it as a target. If you save that target, it's for you to really go in and use this later on if you want to do that. So that option is highlighted still. I'm going to click on next. And it's going to give me all the same information I shared with you before. Make sure the display warm up at least 15 minutes at the very minimum. DisplayPort, USB-C cable, we already talked about all of those. Turn off all the settings that are not relevant, especially one that will change color dynamically as you calibrate, such as True Tone on Apple laptop products. And lastly, do not use the mirroring, which we are not, so we're good to go. And you can see the ICC profile name. This is targeting another monitor. It's not doing the independent calibration value. You can certainly go in and change the name on here too. You can see the cursor is there, but I'm going to leave this as such right now. Click on next. And what I'm simply going to do again is bring the device up, pull the cover off, rotate it to the back so that it's just sitting like there, and the lens is exposed in the front. I am going to click on next. So now it's going to put a target on the display. So we'll do that. And you can see if I don't tilt the display back, sometimes it just have a tendency to dangle like that. And what we really want to do is we want this to lay flat pretty much in the area that we want. This is a little bit difficult to see. So let me angle the display the other way. There you go. You can see how it's actually in the target right there, but it's reflecting a little bit more of the environment than I want to. But anyway, what I'm going to do is click on next, and we're going to start the measurement process. And we'll wait for this to finish. So what it's really doing right now, do you see the flickering happening? It's really going in and talking with the display firmware with that user color mode option to really change all these colors. So it's going to go through similarly to what it was before, 23 patches that we have seen in the previous one. Let me see if I can angle that a little bit. There you go. You guys can see a little bit better. There's 23 patches going on there. This might be a good time to answer some of the questions that, if we have any questions in, chat pod or something like that.
Yes, we do actually have a chat regarding LED bias light. Would that for the monitors help with color matching at all?
Uh, do repeat the question for you one more time, please, Derek.
Yeah. Would an LED bias light for the monitors help with color matching?
That helps you. I would say if you're that it can and it cannot at the same time. So if you set that to a color temperature that's totally off from the display luminance, that's going to give you another color bias almost right away. I would probably say that if you have an LED like that, if the LED is actually set to around 6,000 or 6,500 Kelvin, you're probably going to be okay. Anything more than that, or when it really starts to get into like the warmer tones, you might actually drastically change the way how the color is going to be presented to you on the display, because these are going to calibrate to 6,500 Kelvin and you're looking at something warmer, you're looking at that contrast. So it's going to really bias you. I would say that if you're trying to do the matching part itself, probably do not use any external light, and maybe do not use the purple light as I'm doing in the studio right now. But this is more for edutainment,
There you
educational
go.
entertainment that
It's
we're
part of
doing.
the production.
Yeah, it's a
Eh,
production. Yeah.
exactly. And Art, if I could sneak one more question, one of our
Yeah,
viewers has a Data Color Spider Pro. Is that compatible with the Palette Master software?
yes, Data Color Spider Pro is, although I need to let me circle back on that one at the very end there. We're going to double check the devices because BenQ is just really rolling out support for the PD series. So some of the calibrators may not be fully support yet when you're running Palette Master Ultimate with these PD displays. However, that's a very different story than the SW. The SW has been fully validated, so they're going to have more devices that are available initially from the get-go. So I'm going to circle back and answer that question a little bit later on when we're finished with all this and we go back to the main interface. But that's a really great question.
Awesome. Sounds good, Art. And we have time. You know what? I'm going to sneak another one in if we have
Yeah, throw
time.
in one more question before we
Okay,
continue.
we'll do a quick one.
Yep.
General brightness setting on your screen. Is there a sweet spot for, I know this is widely debated, for how bright do you set your monitor for editing?
It shouldn't be widely debated. Let me put it that way.
Okay.
The magic number, as I said before, is between 80 to 120 nits or candela. Choosing those values in 10 increments are going to match fairly well, especially if you're doing any type of print workflow. So, this will work for designers, this will work for anyone out there. And some people that, some creative, when they set their display to, 100 nits or 120 nits, they're saying like, oh, this is way too dim for what I really need. Can I calibrate brighter? I mean, if you're not going to print, you can calibrate as bright as you want. This is why it's a debate. It really shouldn't be a debate. I think that as a creative, especially if you're a graphic designer, you should always, design, especially if you do in print, you always design with a print in mind. If you are a photographer, for instance, you always do that with, for instance, like also with printing in mind. Now, this standard also spill over into the video, even though there's no printing for that one. It's just, editing to a certain standard, because if you ever set your display to standard like Rec 709 for video, you can a lot of times see that it's actually really dim when you set that to that particular preset. So those are just some of the things to really think about. But the magic number, as I said before, between 80 to 120 nits in 10 nits increments. I think that picking any of those numbers within those values based on your environment, you're going to be good to go in terms of color management. And yeah, if your display is darker, my advice to you is probably it's time to like either control the lighting coming into your environment, or to really dim down the lighting in your studio, or have controllable lighting so that it's not going to be too bright for you to work with those type of display brightness. All right, what I'm going to do is jump back onto the close-up of this particular monitor. And what I'm simply going to do is click on check report. Now, this is the end. A couple of really awesome things about this, and let me put the display back in order a little bit. And I think we can avoid a lot of the reflections that way too. Bear with me just a sec here. There we go. Let's bring this up in line with each other. Right, because everything got to line up and be perfect. That's how I am. Anyway, so if we take a look at this report, the luminance is able to get fairly close. 99, this is 98, 1 nits, you're not going to see a difference. The white point is coming really close. In fact, the white point for this one, it was measuring at 6491. This is 6501. So it's coming fairly close on those. Black point is really nice. And the average delta E Again, this is less than one, so you can't really tell colors apart for a normal human vision. And this is 0.61, so this is really good. Now, what's really neat about this delta E value too is that this is not a delta E value just based on this display alone and how this one's calibrating. This delta E is based on how much the color is off from this particular calibration that I have just done. So what you're really getting is not so much just a display, oh, this display is off by that much. Because every time you get a delta E on the display, for two displays, you can have a delta E value that are very similar, but the colors can totally be off from each other. And the reason why is because it's just describing a whole bunch of values. When I click on more detail here, we'll see that it's really just describing a whole bunch of these values right there that could be different from each display. So having something that can really just show you accurately where your delta E is from the main reference one, that is really cool. I think that's really a winning feature. And I'm trying to actually get all these delta E values at the end there to show you. And everything, for the most part, is less than one, with just the blue being just slightly above one for this one. So obviously is really good. It's having some issues matching the blue, but anything below 2, you're not really going to see a difference unless you have those colors side by side. And most of the time in design or in photography work or in any creative workflow for that matter, they're really just, the color all just homogenized together, so you're going to be good. I'm going to complete this, and you're going to get that warning again, like, do not adjust the display, otherwise you can drastically change the color. We'll confirm that, right? So what we're going to do quickly here is take a look at the devices that are supported in this version. If I go through the list, yes. So BenQ have added a few more devices into this from the very first one that we talked about, that I have actually tested. So majority of the Calibrate X-Rite devices, Spider X and Spider X2, are now added into this. Now, the interesting thing about the devices on this list is that they're all colorimeters, meaning that they're devices that are like these. They're the color spectrophotometers are not supported yet. I would guess that that's going to be coming in a future version. At a future point in time when they have more time to really develop, test, and validate those results from the calibration. So anyway, there you have it. 2 different solutions for calibration, and we have done 3 separate calibrations using these 2 different solutions. I think this is really great, what they're really doing with color management, and a lot of what they're really doing with the software too in terms of Palette Master Ultimate. For me anyway, teaching and talking about color management, it can be a daunting task for a lot of people, right? Because there's a lot of steps to really go through. And to simplify the interface down to this, for designers display series, creator display series, I think this is really awesome. And I think it gives a lot of people just, the confidence to go in there and choose the workflow that I want. Maybe define the brightness a little bit more and just be able to put a calibrate on the display and get good colors. I think that's something really awesome to see. So let's continue on with the questions. I know that there might be some more.
Yes, let's open it up for some Q&A. I know we have visual modulations watching out there who is tapped in to the topic. What is the one thing, Art, with monitors that people overlook, or is there a feature that we probably put too much emphasis on, or what should we be paying attention to with our monitors?
That's a really great question. I think a lot of times, and I think a lot of time we're going to speak specifically for creators in general. I would say this: not any display is going to work. You want to look for a company that has a pretty good calibration from the factory, from the display itself. And yes, one of the things that I do want to address when I'm talking about that too is the question I get often and frequently is, aren't these display already calibrated from the factory? The answer to that one is yes, every single display is calibrated from the factory. And the second follow-up I usually get is, so why do I have to calibrate my display if these are already calibrated from the factory? And that's a really great question. The reason why is because when you calibrate your display at the factory, it is outputting reference value, is calibrating to P3, to sRGB, to whatever color gamut that is, and it's just flashing those known colors. The issue is that our computers are little computers. As great as Apple or any other computer may be, they're not outputting reference color. Did you know that each version of Mac OS changes the color and graphic layering output slightly differently? Starting from Ventura, I mean, Ventura was really like every dot release, they changed something, right? Starting with Sonoma and Sequoia, it becomes a lot more stable in my testing, meaning that you're not seeing those color changes from the graphic layering right now. Even though you may be on an older M series Mac, when you upgrade to OS, it doesn't do that anymore. But these are variables that changes the way how our color is coming out from the display. And I will also add this too. Every time Apple release a major dot release, like for example, right now, yeah, a lot of us started with Sequoia 15.0.1. And when they release 15.1 or .2, I would just go in and recalibrate because every single one of those dots can change the way or has the potential to change the way how your color is being output on the display. And if it doesn't do that, there may be a setting in or related to the graphic output that's changing some of the colors output. So you kind of want to just get everything in line after an OS update. It's just a precautionary thing. I mean, you don't have to be that strict about it, but I think it's a good practice to deploy in your creative workflow.
Hmm. And I don't know if this is a stupid question or not. I know there's no
Okay.
stupid questions ever, but the finish, I know that's a big thing. We choose, matte or like these real high gloss monitors for creative specifically, because I think that's who we're speaking to here. Yes,
Right.
the matte, low gloss, low reflective finish is not as sexy, but is that better for? Is there one that's better or than the other for what creatives do?
I'm actually glad you asked that. It's not a stupid question. It's a very valid question, and it's the one that is contested too much in the world out there. I hear so many different people like commenting on my videos, like there's so much argument in forum about this or that. I'm like, here's the thing, folks. Let's be honest as a creative, and a lot of times what Apple have been doing for so long is making their display glossy only. I'm not calling out Apple for this. I'm just pointing out the obvious because majority of us creative are using Apple products. I mean, some of us are using PC too. So we're going to be inclusive here, but even PCs are doing that. They're making their display glossy, and Apple's been doing that for a very long time. Why are they doing this? Because guess what? When we're taking a look at a glossy display, perception wise, we're going to see more saturation, more contrast right away. So what that does to our picture is that it makes it look flattering almost immediately. You barely have to do any work on it. It looks great. It's like, this is awesome. I'm the best photographer ever, or I'm the best creative ever. Fantastic. So what happens when other people are viewing your work on a matted display out there? Because by the way, there are still a lot more matted displays than glossy ones out there. And we have a tendency to be in our own little bias, meaning that we're using Apple products. So we're assuming everyone's going to use Apple product. I'm like, let me put it this way. Apple commands about like 20% of the creative market in the US and less of that in the world, or just the users, the amount of
Mhm.
computers in general. So when you take a look at that number, there are a lot more people out there that are not using Apple products. And if you want to be inclusive to all your potential future clients, right, your endeavors, it might be a better idea to just be all inclusive for that. So editing on a matted display, what I really like about that in general is a couple of things. It gives you a more honest assessment of where your creative work is. So instead of editing your work and thinking it looks great at around like 60 or 70% of the way there, you're really getting an honest assessment. You're like, oh gosh, this doesn't even look good. I need to push my editing further. So when you can get your picture to look great on a matted display, it's always going to look good on a glossy display, but it's not all the way around. Because I hear a lot of people editing on Apple product before, whether that be iMac, whatever, like, oh, my image looks amazing on here. I get a BenQ hardware calibrated display or one of these, plug it into the calibration. Everything works, validation passed, but my picture looks awful. What's really going on? And usually with those people, sometimes what I'll do is I'll say like, hey, send me one or two files and I'll edit for you like on my matted display and send it back to them. They're like, oh, wow. So I haven't been really
Mhm.
pushing my editing to where I can really take it. That's a lot of times what you're going to get with a glossy display is something that's not really being honest with you as a creative. And that's part of the reason why I prefer that more. And I'm going to also say one more thing. This M4 laptop cycle, MacBook Pro, is the classic example of Apple going back to now offering a nano texture display option. Granted, they do it at $150 extra. I got mine with nano texture anyway, and I can't tell you how much I actually love that display when I'm just literally using it in my studio, because even in a low light situation, a glossy display will always reflect. Try opening just a white web page. You can be in a dark room, but if that white web page is shining on you, you can see yourself in that reflection. Whereas a matte display, it just kind of diffuse that and it's giving me an honest assessment of what I'm really looking at. So I really appreciate that question. That's a really, really great one.
Awesome. A couple of the PD monitors have different resolutions. Does it affect how color is displayed, matched, and calibrated?
Another really great question. The answer is no, it doesn't really affect the way how the color is looking. It's just your perception in terms of how many pixels there are per inch and how I would say like smooth you want your pixels or your graphic, whatever that is you're looking at to be. So that would be the answer to that one. But color accuracy wise, it doesn't really change anything. Now, the only thing that I would just be careful with the PD series, especially with the I would say the older models in the lineup that are still available in the market today, some of these smaller size display and a lower resolution one tends to be of a different bit depth, like 8-bit only instead of 10-bit done by an 8-bit plus FRC. So I would just take caution on that one, but otherwise you're going to be good to go.
Okay, and a final two-part question here. Is there a definitive answer or your advice on size? Is it one of those things where it's like, go out and get the biggest monitor you can fit on your desk, or is there an ideal size? And how often should we be replacing our monitors? I know we talk about calibrating, but what's the shelf life on a monitor for a serious creative? When do you want to replace it?
So let's answer the first question first. Is there an ideal size? No. I would say the ideal size is based on what your preference is, your workflow, and I would argue at large your environment because don't get me wrong, I edit on two 32-inch displays, and no, this is not my setup. This is just studio setup, but my daily driver is a BenQ SW321C, and I love that display. Now, for majority of the people, they take a 32-inch display and unpack in their space, and it's huge. It will take majority of your desk, and having two of them, like right here, it doesn't seem like it's that big, but this is pretty much my wingspan, or like close to my wingspan right there. So it is a lot of monitors for you to really have. That's why there are different sizes are out there. I think ideally, where most creative are going to find the space not too large and something that works really well is going to be the 27-inch model. And just to as a little plug for BenQ, they launched two new models. They released the 27-inch 5K display that are going to be coming earlier next year. That's something I'm really looking forward to testing. And also, they have updated or released an alternative version of this one, PD3225U. So they released another one that is 144 hertz. Now, don't ask me for those exact model numbers. I can't remember them right now, but nonetheless, those two are really coming in a 32-inch 4K 144 and a 27-inch 5K. I think that's going to be a really good one. So the second question is, how often should we be replacing this display? I would say, 3-5 years or so, you can really run them for a very long time. If you start to notice your color is deteriorating and you really can't calibrate it anymore, it's probably time to replace it. A lot of the other things that you may see from display, I would call this like LCD bleeding. And that's when you see like certain colors start to like creep in or like a darker tone creeping in, or if your display is starting to show like starting to discolorate one side versus the next, kind of like what you're seeing in lighting and material right now. Actually, it's on that side. You can see if it starts to look like that and it's not even anymore when it is supposed to be even, especially if you go into Photoshop, pull in white, grays, or black, or I would mostly do white and grays. If they're that off, it's probably time for you to look for a replacement. Now, if you're right in the warranty period, my recommendation is to contact your local support. They're going to do their best to help you out in terms of finding a replacement solution for what you're going to need for your display.
Awesome. And an unsolicited trick from me: when your significant other or spouse gets on you for buying a new expensive monitor, just hold the side, pinch it for a little bit. See, look, it's off. I got to buy it. No,
Hmm.
don't do that. Don't do that.
Yeah,
Art, I'm giving bad advice out here. We
all
got
good.
your YouTube dropped. Art is right. Art, you've probably forgotten more than I'll ever know about monitors. So I want to thank you. It's been a while, like I said, since we've had you on, but you always come on and you know your stuff, man. It's a pleasure as always to have you on. Any closing words?
No, I'm hoping you guys find this helpful. I would say if you want any more information, want to find out more about this, find me on YouTube. That's youtube.com. Artist Right. That's my channel. Would love to see you guys there. Thank you so
There you
much for
go.
today.
Awesome. Huge thank you to Art and of course BenQ for hosting. We did drop the link to his YouTube. Art is right. So definitely go check that out. That's all we have for you for now. Another edition of the B&H Event Space now in the books. Catch y'all next time.
All right. Thanks so much.